getting ready to.
Yonder music. Y'all couldn't hear any of that. Okay. So my mic was muted. Lisa Bobbitt is watching here but listening on Clubhouse. That's dope. I see all of you saying that there's no sound. Accidentally had the mic muted. And what I was explaining was that for those of you all who have known me for some time, you know that if you've ever heard me say, just read a magazine that fucked up my day, one, I'm quoting Jigga, I'm quoting Jay-Z. And two, that, okay, it looks like I think everybody can hear me now. I see Kim Moore and I see Brenda Carroll Jackson Harvey and I see Judy Lee and Joker and Mimi Brown. Hi, everyone. Um, you know that I'm quoting Jay-Z, and the other thing that you know is that I've probably either just read an article or had an unpleasant experience. In this case, it was a little bit of both. Um, I'm running a little bit late, in part because I've added a layer of complexity to this evening. Right now, I am broadcasting as we normally do, but I'm also live on Clubhouse. Let me move this microphone out of the way. This is my narrating microphone. Let's get that off camera. So I'm broadcasting live on Clubhouse. I think everybody can hear me on Clubhouse okay. But yeah, this is how all this is going down now. And it just kind of took me a minute to get everything adjusted. In addition to that, um, just had a really difficult conversation with a dear friend. Um, Seems like those have been happening increasingly lately, which I am coming to recognize as a sign that there is some great change and transition about to happen in my life, which I look forward to. I applaud that. I'm excited about that. I'm trying to get this lighting adjusted as we speak. Ooh, that was not the move. Let's just go ahead and turn that right on off. Um, but let's get into tonight's work. Tonight, we're cracking the spine on a brand new book. Not new. This book was first published back in 2013, but it's new to Storytime with Julian. We have not read this book before, and I'm excited to get into it. This story, this book, this collection of stories is called Kabu Kabu. Let's go ahead and hold up the cover. I believe this is the most recent edition of it. Kabu Kabu by Nnedi Okorafor, Okorafor, and I'm working on my pronunciations. So I beg apology if I'm not getting it quite right. Still working on those things. The two stories that we're going to read tonight are The Magical Negro and the titular story, Kabu Kabu. I was excited to open up this collection. I was excited to read it. I was excited about it in part because I really love the genre called Afrofuturism. And today, I learned that this book is not Afrofuturism. This book is considered by the author African futurism. And some of the stories and some of her other works also work in an area that I'm actually fascinated by and will be doing a lot more digging into African Jujuism, which I think explores some of the magical tropes that we see in a lot of speculative fiction among or by Black authors. However, with a very keen and very respectful look at the very real religions and faith practices and belief practices that exist in the various countries of the continent of Africa, and not turning them into tropes. I believe I believe that is the author's intent, is to explore it with a reverence and a sense of reality that are too often missing from other types of tellings of that work, which I think is a really exciting thing. But I'm gonna give you guys full disclosure. So the way things operate with Storytime with Julian as sort of a franchise, the way we're building things out, my management team helps me run the social media, which is necessary because I am not good at doing those things by myself. I will have news and forget that other people don't know it unless I tell them, and that the best way to do that is through the social media channels, the Twitters and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, if you will. So we announced that we were going to be reading this book and referred to the collection as Afrofuturism, and the author, God love her, I'm really excited that she was even paying attention, corrected us and linked us to a thread wherein she starts with the tweet, "I don't write Afrofuturism," all bold, all caps. And it was an interesting read. It was actually a very fascinating and very necessary read. And I'm going to post links to that thread as well as to the two subsequent articles that are linked to in the thread that I feel are important to and germane to the discussion. I'm going to say all that to say that while I absolutely will not disrespect the this is weird because I'm getting Clubhouse notifications, and I think somebody wants to say something, but I'm not going to be opening up the Clubhouse channel for comments. At any rate, the we're never going to disrespect the author. I firmly believe that any author, any writer has the right to call their work whatever they want to call their work, to ask their work to be called what they believe it is, what their intent was when they created it. Fully believe that. Believe that uh, in particular with regard to African futurism, which is a term that the author herself has coined. But I'm going to say that reading the justifications and the distinctions of African futurism versus what I know and what I understand to be Afrofuturism, and owning that there are people far more well versed in this who have dedicated years of study to this. The author herself being a PhD holder, likely being one, to understand and to make and create that distinction. However, reading the rationalization and the justification of it left me a little cold. And there's a certain political aspect to it that I think goes to the very complex and complicated relationship between African Americans and continental Africans, um, people who are of countries of the continent of Africa. We have, I know some of you just looking at who's here in the scroll, we have had different discussions about some of the public figures who walk that line, who um, represent and portray sometimes African American characters, but who come from a continental African background. And there are times, at times, what occur as a division and sometimes even a contempt. And while I will not go as far as to say that I read contempt in the author's distinction between African futurism and Afrofuturism, I did read something that left me cold. I read something that felt like a it felt like a putting off, a dismissiveness almost of Afrofuturism because of its relationship to the diaspora, to dealings with what is a part of the history of African Americans. My understanding, my embracing of the term Afrofuturism has always been one that included black writers across the board. I see Afro as all the black. Um, that is not how Dr. Okorafor sees it, and so she makes the distinction of African futurism. And in her, there was something in my reading of her words that just left me feeling like, oh, because Afrofuturism is them over there, and we don't do that. But I am excited about, me, Julian, I am excited about the celebration of Nigerian culture that promises to be inside these pages. The Magical Negro has previously been published in a couple of quarterlies, and I think we'll have a link to that at the end of this program. Kabu Kabu is actually a novella that is co-written with another author. Let me make sure that I get that author's name. Co-written with Alan Dean Foster. We're going to get through as much of it as we can within our time period, but I wanted to kind of give you guys a background. So, though on this show we talk about Afrofuturism a lot, this work I'm reading from distinguishes itself from that. And I want you guys in your hearing of it to be present to that, open to that, hear it for what it is, and let me know in the comments some of your thoughts about that distinction and how it resonates for you, because I think it really could be very interesting. And with that extended pre-mumble, we're going to go ahead and go into the Magical Negro. Oh, by the way, if you're looking for us on Twitch tonight, we're not there. Twitch said that the title of my program is invalid, and honestly, I don't have the energy to center that platform right now and figure out what happened there. So we're just going to work with what we got. The Magical Negro. Lance the Brave stood on the edge of the cliff, panicking, his long blonde hair flowing in the breeze. Behind him, they were coming fast through the lush grassy field. All Lance could do was stare, his cheeks flushed. Once upon him, they would suck the life from his soul like lions sucking the meat from bones of a fresh kill. He held his long sword high. Its silver handle was encrusted with heavy blue jewels, and it felt so right in his hand. He loved his sword. So many times it helped him bring justice to the world. He'd fight to the end, his life for his country. If only he knew how the amulet around his neck worked. The ruby red jewel bounced heavily against his chest as if to taunt him more with its difficult riddle. He never was any good at riddles. He was never very good at riddles. He took a deep breath, a tear falling down his rosy cheek. My life for my country, he whispered, trying not to look down the cliff. If it must come to this. But it could have been better. It could have been more. Any moment now. It wouldn't be quick, but painful. The shadows were savage beasts. The horrible black things were known to skin a man alive, tear his fingernails off one by one, boil a man's flesh until it fell apart. The shadows would dirty his very soul. The shadows came from the very heart of darkness. I never should have gone there, he thought. The shadows were almost upon him, devouring the light that shined on the grassy field. They left only rotten, filthy blackness behind. Lance closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer for the welfare of his beautiful fair wife and lovely daughter. Chastity, back at the castle. When he opened his eyes, he nearly fell over the cliff. What is that? He thought. Standing between him and approaching shadows was an equally dark figure. The African man floated inches above the grass, his large crown of puffy hair radiating from his head like a black explosion, his skin a dirty brown, almost blended in with the shaded evil approaching him. He turned to Lance, held up a dark black hand, and brought it to his thick lips. Shh, no time, he said in a low, smoky voice. He wore no shirt or shoes and carried no weapons. He'll be killed, Lance thought sadly. He didn't like the idea of someone else dying on the cliff with him. This moment was about his martyrdom only. Lance shook his head, his long blonde hair shaking. Please, he said, you must. Look, there's no time, so just listen, the African said. The amulet responds to your heart. The shadows were only meters away. Who is this man? Lance wondered. Where did he come from? How can he levitate? Look deep within yourself, the African said. You have the power. You just haven't tapped into it. The black man's eyes suddenly bulged and a dark red spot ate its way into the middle of his chest. He'd been pierced with an evil blackness deeper than his own. He fell to his knees, coughing up blood. The shadows paused behind him, as if to savor the death of the black man. Lance watched him with a sad frown. The man only had moments to live. Then the African man looked up at him. Lance would have jumped back, but even in his fear, he knew to do so would send him prematurely plummeting to his death. The African man looked angry. Angry as hell. Yo, what the fuck is this bullshit? The African quickly stood up and looked at the red hole in his chest, oozing blood and other fluids. Oh, hell no. It ain't going down like this. Damn. How many times? He turned to the shadows and held up a black finger. Y'all should know better. You know what I can do to you. You ain't that stupid. The shadows, the looming shadows, retreated a bit. Lance was shocked. Could this man possibly be commanding the shadows? The shadows were pure power. How can he control them? Lance numbly wondered. The black man turned to Lance and pointed the finger. Look, fuck you. Then he looked up at the blue sky and said, my ass comes over to save his ass. And after I tell him what he needs to do, I get sixed? What you think I am? Some fucking shucking and jiving happy Negro still dying for the master because my life ain't worth shit? He cocked his head and looked at Lance. I'm the motherfucking magical Negro. What makes you think I'm going to tell you how to use that damn amulet you've been carrying around for 2 months because you too stupid to figure out how to use it and then fucking die afterwards? What world is you living in? Some kind of typical fantasy world from one of the typical fantasy books? Like I ain't got no family of my own to risk my life for and shit? The magical Negro reached into the pocket of his black pants and brought out a fat cigar and lighter. He lit it and took 2 puffs. He blew several rings and with a wave of his hand linked them into a chain that settled around his long neck. Then he laughed as the chain dissolved. I, in my heart? Lance asked. He was terribly confused. He could barely understand the dark man. What a strange dialect he was speaking. Controlling evil darkness? Could it be because he had internalized the evil of the shadows? Could that be what... Hold on. Could it be because he had internalized the evil of the shadows? Could that be what turned his skin that horrible color, blew out his lips, gave him such a huge deformed nose, corrupted his hair? Lance frowned. Why am I thinking of such things in my last moments? He stepped forward, holding up his sword, again trying to look brave. The magical Negro shook his head and said, had enough of this. With a wave of his hand, Lance fell from the cliff to his death. The magical Negro listened for the thump of Lance's body on the rocks below. He smiled. He took a puff from his cigar. He picked up his black jacket that sat in the grass and shrugged it around his narrow shoulders. Then he picked up his black top hat and placed it on his head and laughed a wheezy laugh. Shit, he drawled, looking directly at you. You need to stop reading all this stupidness. The magical Negro ain't about to get his ass kicked no more. Them days is over. The magical Negro rested his red cane on his shoulder and leisurely strolled into the forest to see if he could find him some hobbits, castles, dragons, princesses, and all that other shit. And thus endeth the story. You will not tell me, you cannot tell me that when we got to the part where he was like, "The fuck is this shit?" that y'all weren't like, "Wait, what? Huh?" You can't tell me that when that hit, y'all weren't like, "What is even happening here?" Yo, so that is the opening story, the opening salvo, the shot over the bow, if you will, of Kabu Kabu. And I think that in that story, for me, it occurs for me that the author is doing quite a bit of the work of making the distinction and offering some really salient critique of how she perceives other works within the genre that she is most typically cast. That is my estimation. I do think that it's really, really, I think it's really fascinating and an incredible juxtaposition of characters and styles. And there was a certain feel good to it. I'm not going to lie. Just, you know what? I'm done with this. Blink. Gone, Lance. You weren't even supposed to be here. No how. Let's take a look at Kabu Kabu because we got nothing but time. We are good for the time being. It's only 10:23, and we typically will run till about 11. Before we get into the next story, let me let you guys know I am gonna do a read on Christmas Eve. I don't know why. Ain't none of y'all gonna be here, I'm sure. But yeah, Thursday is the 24th. I am gonna go ahead and do a read on Christmas Eve. I don't think I'm gonna do one on New Year's Eve. Um, I might go ahead and take that Tuesday and that Thursday off, and we just come back at the beginning of the year with a few minor little changes. Definitely want to shake up where we center the platform and how we start distributing some of the content. Um, Facebook has been home since we started, but I don't think it really serves us well to have Facebook be sort of the main hub. I think we need to move outside of that. So, as we move in through January, there will be some additional changes. I also want to remind you all, still wanting and accepting submissions for our anthology. Um, Kelly James, don't you bring that nasty viscous liquid to my house on Christmas Eve or any other day. No nog and none of that. I actually mess with horchata, but what's that other stuff people be drinking? I don't want that either. No, I don't like viscous beverages. Okay, like milk, not even whole milk. I'm at a point where I can only really mess with 2%. That's about as viscous as I want to drink. I don't even like saying the word viscous. It doesn't. No. Anyway, y'all, let's go ahead and break into Kabu Kabu. Ngozi hated her outfit, but it was good for traveling. Her well worn jeans had no pockets on the back, thereby accentuating the ass she didn't have. She'd accidentally stained her white t shirt with chocolate after stuffing too much chocolate donut too fast into her mouth while rushing. And she had grabbed the wrong Chuck Taylors. Her black ones would have matched better than the red. She'd overslept. Somehow she hadn't heard her fucking alarm clock. Now she was going to be late for her plane to New York, which would make her late for her plane to London, which would cause her to miss her connection to Port Harcourt. Shit! She fought desperately to hail a cab. Shit! As a stress reliever, the angry repeating of the word helped to lower her blood pressure about as effectively as it did to draw something yellow with wheels closer to the curb, which is to say, not at all. The day's disaster didn't end here. The long fingernail of her right index finger had broken, and she kept scratching herself with it. Her skin was sandpaper dry from taking a hot shower and not having time to put on lotion afterward. She had forgotten her antiperspirant. Not only did she feel that she looked like a pig despite the cold outside, she was sweating like one. Wonderful, she thought. Bronchial pneumonia would give her something to look forward to as well. The only saving grace was that she'd had the good sense to pack her things the night before. Her backpack, carry-on, and large suitcase were in far better shape than their owner. She stumbled out of her townhouse and dragged her things down the steps. Outside, the full moon was still visible in the early morning sky. Outside, the full moon was still visible in the early morning sky. The sun wouldn't be up for a while. Nothing like leaving for another continent after a restful night's sleep. She saw it then, an underpossessing vehicular miracle heading up the street in her direction. Too much to hope for, she thought wildly. She started jumping up and down, waving wildly and shouting, "Taxi! Oh, please, God, let it be a taxi!" As it drew nearer, Ngozi first sensed and then saw that it was traveling too fast. Buoyed along by a cushion of heavy-bassed music, she frowned. Her frantically waving hand dropped to her side and she took a step back. The cab had the sleek but stunned look of a hybrid vehicle. Might be a Toyota or a Honda. In the darkness, she couldn't see the logo. The card was weirdly striped green and white and lizard-like. Even from a distance, she could see that the exterior was pocked with way too many dents and scuffs, like an old boxer past his prime. As it came closer, she hunted in vain for a taxi number or business logo on the passenger side door. Neither presented itself. Instead, there was a short inscription, "Two footsteps do not make a path." Standing in front of the fire hydrant, the only open space on the stretch of street, she gawked at the oncoming vehicle. Despite the seriousness of her situation, she made a choice that was as easy as it was quick. "I am not," she muttered to herself, "going near that thing." She glanced down at her watch and bit her lip. She was out of options. The taxi screeched to a halt and backed up impossibly fast. Then it zigzagged crazily into the undersized and very illegal parking space before her. It was the most adept bit of parallel parking she had ever witnessed. Not to mention quasi-suicidal. Barely an inch of clearance remained in front or behind the cab. She shook her head and chuckled. This guy must be Nigerian. Just my luck. In the back of her mind, she felt a twinge of caution, but she didn't have time to waste. The driver turned his music down and jumped out, shrugging a leather jacket over his short-sleeved blue shirt to ward off the chill. He was short, squat, medium brown-skinned, and possibly in his early 40s. Definitely Igbo, she decided. "I take you wherever you need to go, madam," he announced grandiosely. His accent immediately confirmed Ngozi's suspicion. It was quite similar to that of her own parents. "O'Hare," she said. "No problem." She hefted her backpack up and stepped to the cab's passenger door as he loaded the rest of her luggage into the truck. "I'm running late. Really late." "I see," he responded with unexpected solemnity. "Where you headed?" She was too busy wrestling with the back passenger door to reply. She grew even sweatier. The door wasn't budging at all. Loading a traveler's baggage and taking off before he or she could get in was a widespread taxi scam everywhere in the world. The driver shut the trunk and smiled at her. "Let me get that for you," he said. "It doesn't open for just anyone." He was chuckling to himself as he came around and grabbed the handle. Wrapping his fingers around the worn, smudged metal, he gave it a simultaneous tug and twist. The door swung wide open with a curious non-metallic pop. Her nose was assailed by the unexpected aromatic scent of cedar wood and oil, both in much stronger concentration than was typical for the usual generic commercial car deodorant. She slid inside and promptly froze. Nestled snugly between the front seats was a large leafy potted plant. On the ceiling of the car, but presently shut, was a slightly askew sliding sunlight. A wealth of skillfully hand-wrought rosaries and glistening cowrie shell necklaces drooped from the rearview mirror. Most startlingly, the entire interior of the cab was intricately hand-inlaid with thousands upon thousands of tiny multicolored glass beads. "Wow," she whispered, running an open palm carefully over the car's interior. The feel was smooth but bumpy, like a golf ball turned inside out. This must have cost a fortune, she thought. It was as if she had stepped inside the world's most elaborate handicraft necklace. Gazing at her unexpectedly ornate surroundings, she tried to imagine someone or several someones taking the time and patience to complete the intricate work of art. Further up front was something that looked decidedly out of place in the bead-encrusted shell-strung interior. Set into the dash, beside the battered heating and air conditioning controls, was what looked like a computer installation. Rotating lazily on the screen was a three-dimensional image of a bushy ceremonial Igbo masquerade mask. At least, that's what Nguzi guessed it to be. As a choice of screensaver, it was a distinctly unsettling one. She shivered. She'd never liked masquerades. especially the ones at certain parties back home that turned so violent people had to hold back the performers with thick ropes. The damn things were supposed to be manifestations of spirits of dead people, and they looked and danced like insane monsters. Serious nightmare material. The driver got in and slammed his door shut. If he noticed the anxiety in her expression, he chose not to remark on it. "You never answered my question," he said, throwing his right arm over the top of the front passenger seat. He twisted to look back at her as he started the cab. Another surprise. Despite the vehicle's scruffy appearance, the engine's purr was barely audible. Definitely a hybrid, Ngozi concluded. "How do I know where to take you if you don't tell me where you're going?" "I did," Ngozi frowned. "Didn't I say O'Hare? United Airlines? I'm going to New York." "Got relatives there?" the man inquired. "You visiting your folks?" "No." She wavered and finally confessed. I'm going to Nigeria, Port Harcourt. My sister's getting married." He grinned. "Thought so. You can't hide where you're from. Oh, not even with those Dada dreadlock on your head. You still an Igbo girl." "Woman," she corrected him, growing annoyed. "Woman in a big hurry. I'm a lawyer, you know." Fuck, she thought. Shut up, Ngozi. How much does he need to know to get me to the airport, man? Next thing he'll try to scam me out of all my money in some fiercely tricky, specifically Nigerian way. "Ah, big Igbo woman then," he murmured thoughtfully. "And I was born and raised here," she added, unable to resist. "So I'm Igbo, Nigerian, and American." The driver laughed again. "Igbo first," he said as he shifted into drive. Jamming the accelerator, he roared out of the illegal parking space with the same lunatic adeptness with which he had darted into it. Flinching, she grabbed the back of the seat in front of her to steady herself and held her breath. Oh my God, I feel like I'm in Nigeria already. As they accelerated out onto the street, he turned the music back up. Listening, Ngozi smiled. It was Fela Kuti, Nigerian's greatest rebel musician. She loved the song that was playing, shuffling and smiling, crooning his unique command of mastery, mystery, and music. Fela spoke to her through the speakers. "You Africans, please listen as Africans, and you non-Africans, please listen to me with open mind." Ah. Ngozi found herself, as always, lulled into reminiscence by his honeyed words. She thought of her father's village, where the dirt roads became impassable every rainy season, where any effort to improve them was thwarted by friendly thievery, lies, and jealousy. Last time she had visited her father's village with her parents and sister, and their departure had been marked by a small riot. It was caused by cousins, aunts, uncles, and strangers battling into the rooms the four of them had just left. They hoped to grab whatever the visitors from America might have left behind. Among the desperate, hopeful scavengers had been Ngozi's cousin, who was smart, but unable to afford medical school, and her uncle, with the Hausa tribal marks on his cheek from when he was a little boy. Those 3 vertical lines on each cheek had served for more than decoration. They were all that had allowed her uncle to survive the Civil War of the 60s. Ngozi let herself slump back against the surprisingly soft seat. She had not been home in 3 years. Chicago, America was great, but she missed Nigeria. "I want you all to please take your minds out of this musical contraption and put your minds into any goddamn church, any goddamn mosque, any goddamn celestial, including Seraphim and Cherubim. Now, we're all there now. Our minds are in those places. Here we go." She smiled to herself. That was Fela, West Africa's greatest anti-colonialist, angry, obnoxious, wonderful, and thought-provoking all at the same time. They turned onto Halstead and headed south, weaving through traffic at a high speed with an intensity and determination that earned the cab several furious honks and not a few Chicago-style curses from the startled drivers they shot past. Ngozi hung on for dear life. What ought to have been her opportunity for her to cool down was instead one for more sweating as the driver skirted airport-bound limos and huge semis by scant inches. She considered telling him to drop her off at the next stoplight. Up front, he was swearing and laughing, and at times it was impossible to tell one from the other. His hands worked the horn as if it were as if it were a second mouth. Eventually, he glanced up at the rearview mirror. She struggled to look back with an expression other than that of sheer terror. Why you wear your hair like that? Instantly, Ngozi's fear turned to exasperation. She wasn't even in Nigeria yet, and already she was getting this typical antediluvian macho shit. Because I like it this way, she snapped. Why do you wear your hair like that? Is that any way to speak to your elder? The cab driver commented, sounding hurt. Miss Big Fancy Lawyer with no ass? Ngozi's eyes widened. Her blood pressure, already high, went up another 20 points. What? The man laughed afresh. Do you even speak Igbo? No, not a damn word. You got a problem with that? Ew, he exclaimed disapprovingly. Of course I do. You are incomplete, Shah. Oh, give me a break. She rolled her eyes. You don't know me. Dodging around a slow bus, he took a wild turn to the left, which threw her sharply to the side. Straightening, she searched the back seat. How come you don't have any seatbelts back here? What you need those for? He asked, eyeing her in the mirror. You in the back. Maybe because you drive like a maniac? Don't worry, I'll get you there alive. They had turned onto a side road flanked by uniform rows of houses marching in brownstone lockstep. None of the intersections they crossed appeared to have street signs, including the one they were rocketing along. Have you ever been to Nigeria, miss? Many times. A lot of my family is still there. I try to visit as often as I can. That shut him up. She smiled. Nigerian men and their bullshit assumptions, she thought. Her smile vanished when the cab's speakers went doom. The entire vehicle shook. She clapped her hands over her ears. What the fuck? She screamed. Watch your language, Miss Big Lawyer. First you criticize my hair, now you criticize my language. Do I look 10 years old to you? Got a stop to make, he said. He fiddled with the dashboard computer where the masquerade mask had given way to an image of a young man. Don't worry, we won't be late. Within a minute, they pulled up in front of the brownstone buildings. The man whose visage smiled from the screen was standing out front, cradling a briefcase. The image on the monitor didn't convey his height and build. The man stepped up to the front window. Festus, the driver said. He reached out and slapped hands with the man. What's up? Can you take me over to VV's really quick? Festus's accent was an intriguing melange of Nigerian and British English, and something else. Perfectly styled jeans enveloped his long legs. A finely cut, long-sleeved navy shirt could not conceal his muscled chest. VV's? Ngozi frowned as she leaned forward. I know that place. That's too out of the way. I can't miss this flight, man. Relax, the driver urged her. I said I'd get you where you need to go. Bending low, Festus peeked inside the cab. Ngozi had every intention of persuading him to find another taxi. Initially, the soft glow of streetlights revealed smooth brown skin, perfect lips, prominent cheekbones. Festus was utterly and unabashedly gorgeous. Her urgency dissolved like a pat of butter on hot broth. Ngozi felt her ears pop. She knew she should slide as far away as possible from this man, but what she wanted to do was slide closer. She swallowed hard, not moving either way. Hi, was all she could say. Hey. He held her eyes with a gaze that was more than forward. A shiver ran down through her periwinkle-colored toenails to her dada locks. He pulled the door shut as the driver started the car, then turned toward her. I'm Festus McDaniel. Despite feeling more than a little overwhelmed, she had to laugh. Is that your real name? When I need it to be. Then my name is Aurora Monroe. Ah, an X-Men fan. She could not have been more surprised if he had announced he was the pilot for her forthcoming flight. You too? When I need to be, he repeated, this time punctuating it with an undisguised leer. He scooted closer. Ngozi was annoyed to find that she did not mind, especially after her edgy go-round with the cab driver. What was happening? This was not like her. Her temples were pounding. She felt her eyes closing, her lips parting. Hey, the driver yelled. Her eyes snapped open. Festus, this is my passenger. Back off. Ngozi blinked again. Her mind cleared and the throbbing in her blood faded. Festus's face was close enough to hers that she could smell his breath. It was unexpectedly slightly fragrant of mint, and the saltiness she could not immediately place. He was not only the most gorgeous man she had ever seen, and she'd seen plenty, he smelled really good. She pressed her temples harder. What the hell was I just doing? That leer, or had it been a sneer? Whatever it was still there, plastered across his face as he leaned away and stared at her. Adrift in confusion, Ngozi could have sworn she saw fangs retreating under his upper lip. What the fuck? She pressed herself as close to the door and as far away from him as possible. What goes on in your head right now? He asked softly. Huh? Don't mind him, the driver advised her. He was scowling at Festus as he tossed something over his right shoulder. Ngozi felt it land in her lap. Suck on that, the driver said, watching her through the mirror. It'll make you feel more like yourself. She looked down and found herself staring at a cherry Jolly Rancher. Her fingers worked mechanically as she unwrapped the candy and popped it in her mouth. Flushed from the embarrassment, she turned to the window to avoid the other passenger's unwavering gaze. All sweetness and tartness and fake cherryness, the candy dissolved slowly in her mouth. She did feel better. Having lost her attention, Festus chatted with the driver in rapid Igbo all the rest of the way to Vivi's. Ngozi tried to translate what they were saying, but all she caught were bits and pieces like 4119 and money and Oyibo, which meant either white person or foreigner. It took much less time to get to Vivi's than she had anticipated, and she was more than a little shocked when she checked her watch. Only 15 minutes. She attributed the accomplishment to the driver's unsurpassed, if wholly maniacal driving skills. They pulled up to the Nigerian restaurant and the passenger eased out, his movements as supple as a dancer's. As he stepped over the curb, he looked back at the cab and blew a kiss in Ngozi's direction. She winced and tried to look away, and instead found herself following him as he strode inside. As he entered, he thrust first one arm and then another into a neatly pressed suit jacket. He slipped it easily over his shoulders. He looked sharp. Is that Armani? She wondered. A frown creased her face. Wait a minute. He wasn't carrying that when he got in the cab. Sorry about that, the driver apologized. But he tips well. Of course he does, Ngozi mumbled, still confused. Someone like that. Her voice trailed away. Once again, the driver cranked up the music, and wonder of wonders, both passenger and driver remained silent for the duration of the drive to O'Hare. As the cab pulled up to the United Airlines terminal, a check of her watch showed that she had barely half an hour before takeoff. The instant the car stopped, she jumped out, yanking her pack and purse after her. While the driver was unloading her large suitcase from the trunk, she fumbled in her pocket for a cell phone. It wasn't there. Her heart started pounding. She checked her purse, then her carry-on. Passport, purse again, backpack, underwear, deodorant, all present and more or less accounted for. Only one thing still missing. Only one thing. Obligingly, the driver helped drag her suitcase into the cab. Then he got in the driver's seat. Soon the security people would shoo them off. I'll drive around, he said, when the security guard began yelling them to move on. You search. She quickly unlocked her suitcase and began rummaging frantically within. Futile. She knew damn well that her cell had been in her jacket pocket. She glanced again at her watch. The numbers continued to tick away relentlessly. She had 15 minutes left, and that is if they didn't lock the boarding gate on her. Where the hell? She asked, rising hysteria in her voice. Where the hell is it? No time to get another boarding pass. I can't miss this flight. I can't miss the wedding. I have to be there for her. She had a horrible, sinking feeling. She grabbed her wallet. Credit card, come on, she whispered. She'd need that for a new boarding pass. It wasn't there. Her license, library card, office building ID, insurance card, Sam Club's card, World Wildlife Foundation card, they all sat in their usual slots, except her credit card. Inside, she screamed and frothed at the mouth. On the outside, she stayed calm. They arrived back at the terminal and she threw open the rear door of the taxi and began searching seat creases, floor, under the front seat. 10 minutes left. Getting back into the car and slamming the door, she tilted her neck forward and rested her forehead against the cold metal of the hood. Defeated. They do all this stupid, crazy, traditional shit, she mumbled, talking as much to herself as to the silently staring driver. My sister was born here like me. I can't let her go through this alone. He closed his door and looked in the rearview mirror. I'm sorry, he murmured. I truly am. He paused. The security guy is coming. We go around again? Whatever, she muttered. They drove away from the terminal. At that moment, revelation dawned on her, and it was not pretty. She looked up sharply, and when she met his eyes in the mirror, she knew. You've got to be kidding. The driver let out a short sigh and nodded sadly, knowingly. He isn't common, but he can be a thief. Festus. Stupid, she told herself. Big lawyer she was. Right. Yep, the driver confirmed. Damn it! She screamed. My own fault, too. I should have left earlier, given myself more time, skipped the damn makeup. I've heard about the hours lawyers have to deal with, he said. The pressures. Ngozi couldn't bear it anymore. The tears came. She wasn't thinking about herself. Her mind was full of visions of her sister being toted around like some parcel, being forced to say things she had not been raised to believe. Her sister was marrying an Igbo man she had met in college. Fine, that was her sister's choice. It didn't mean Ngozi had to like him, and she never had. He was always making snide comments about how Ngozi was 35, childless and unmarried. Once he had even, quite deliberately, called her Mr. Ngozi. Then he had insisted on a traditional wedding in the village for all his relatives to attend. She didn't really want to go, but she had no choice. She needed to be there for her sister. The driver continued to stare at her in the mirror, but by now she was too miserable for his steady gaze to make her any more uncomfortable than she already was. He pulled on the side of the highway and turned around. Look, he said, my job is to get you where you need to go. I promised you I would do that. I know other ways to get you where you need to be. She wiped her nose on her sleeve, not giving a damn about the hygienic or visual consequences. What? Like fly from another airport midway? He shrugged. It's sort of a private transport setup. She stared back at him. Heroin drop-offs, 419 scams, and all sorts of other Nigerian-oriented shady business flashed through her mind. Hadn't she already been victimized once this morning? I'm a lawyer, she reminded him. It's my duty to uphold the you want to be there for your sister, right? Her insides clenched. She was past desperate. I have to be. Her answer appeared to resolve something within him. So we go. She started to say something. Finally, motivated more by resignation than any real hope, she got in. Can I use your phone to cancel my credit card and pause my cell service? They drove down South Wabash Avenue for 10 minutes, exited onto Congress, and turned onto a small commercial road. The increasingly industrial surroundings were unnerving her anew. Now then, I only have one request, he told her. She frowned. Request? What are you talking about? What kind of request? Stay in my cab. Why would I want to? For the second time that morning, Ngozi felt her head rattle. When her vision cleared, she found herself looking toward the dashboard computer installation. The picture had reverted back to the image of the disquieting masquerade mask. She felt a fresh jolt of anxiety. Get a hold of yourself, she thought uneasily. You aren't picking anyone else up, are you? She asked. A man must make his bread, the driver said. Don't worry, I get you there. Turning down still another side street, he slowed to a halt in front of a car wash. It was operational, but not especially busy. Have another passenger to pick up, he declared. Oh, whatever. Thoroughly beaten, Ngozi leaned back. She took a deep, deliberate, calming breath. It didn't help. With nothing to do and nothing to look forward to, she peered indifferently at the car wash. A glistening silver Mercedes emerged, paused briefly at the exit, turned left, and drove off. Behind it, oversized tan and brown bushes continued to spin. She heard of 24-hour car washes, but had never had occasion to make use of one. So who are we? Shh! The driver hissed. He was staring intently at the car wash. Bemused and exhausted, Ngozi followed his eyes. She let out a startled gasp. Oh, great, what now? Then she saw. The largest spinning brushes detached itself from the interior of the car wash. Still rapidly spinning, it came toward them as if it had officially checked out and was leaving work for the day. Ngozi trembled, unable to look away. It whipped water from itself as it approached. What is, you see that? Ngozi babbled. Are you seeing? You better move over, the driver advised her. It's going to be a tight fit. She gaped at him. Say what? The apparition continued advancing toward the idling cab. Ngozi guessed it to be about 7 feet tall, 4 feet wide. It hadn't looked that huge when it first came out. A giant spinning car wash brush. Oh, sure, right. Why? Why not? Then she heard it. Oh, shit, this isn't happening. She heard herself whisper. Doop, doop, doop. The thumping of a small drum. Frantically, she grabbed at the nearest door handle. She no longer cared where she was or where she needed to be. She was going to get the fuck out of that insane cab and away from its crazy driver and make a run for it. The door would not open. The handle wouldn't even budge. Let me out. She kept her voice as calm as she could. Looking back, she saw that the giant brush was almost to the cab. Her eyes blurred with tears of terror and distress. She blinked them away. Please, sir, she stammered. Let me out. Right now. No, you just take it all easy, big lawyer, the driver admonished her. She won't hurt you. She just needs a ride. A thousand clashing, conflicting impossibilities were flying through Ngozi's mind. That thing approaching the cab was a masquerade, but masquerades were mythical beings. They were spirits and ancestors. They didn't exist, except in legend. A remnant of full moon still lingered in the sky, its baleful light now illuminating entirely too many of her surroundings. She was in a part of the city she had never seen before. No street signs. First, a strange man steals her emotions, and then her cell phone and a credit card. And now this thing was going to get in the cab with her. It stopped outside the passenger window, up close, so close, too close. She could see its body was a thick column of shredded raffia, pieces of cloth, and a string of red beads. She tried to open the door again. The handle wouldn't move. Open, she heard herself screaming. Please. A sudden breeze from nowhere filled the interior of the cab with the heady aroma of palm wine. Ngozi pressed herself against the car door, raising a leg and ran an arm up as a shield. The creature standing outside the taxi dissolved into a rose-hued mist and came wafting slowly in through the window. Pressing against the door now, Ngozi started to laugh uncontrollably. Once fully within the cab, the being rematerialized, its fragrant bulk completely filling the seat beside her and threatening to spill over into her cringing lap. Rough raffia scratched at Ngozi's face. At least it was dry now. The wooden head perched atop the raffia's mass had a stern female face. Now it turned, slow and silent, and stared down at her. She felt every hair on her body stand on end. Just stay calm, the driver suggested unperturbed. It'll be a short ride. She's just another passenger. As he pulled away from the car wash, he turned up the music again. Fela sang, "Every day not the same thing, shuffering and smiling." As they drove, the masquerade shook to the beat of the music, the raffia that composed its body quivering and shaking. When he got out of the cab 10 minutes later in the parking lot of a bookstore that wasn't open for business yet, Ngozi was left half paralyzed and with nothing more to say. Her arms and right cheek sported fine scratches from the brush of the creature's leaves, and the blast of rose-colored mist of the masquerade made when it exited the car had left her clothes and hair damp, fragrant and sweet-scented, but damp. "Chicago's a big place," the driver declared amiably. "You work graveyard, you pick up all kinds of immigrants who work all kinds of jobs." Clearing her throat, Ngozi managed to find a voice. Though reduced to something like a whimper, it did resemble hers. "I want to go home." The driver smiled. The driver laughed just as he had before. "You worry too much, girl, woman," he corrected himself. "I suppose it part of being a big lawyer. I said I'd get you there." "Home," she croaked weakly, repeating herself, slouching low in the seat. She grasped her short dreadlocks. "I am seriously screwed," she thought. They were barely clear of the parking lot when the car shook yet again. The image on the monitor changed to that of a rotating axe. Immediately, the driver slammed on the brakes, turned around. "Where are we? Who are you picking up now?" Her voice had turned shrill. "When am I going to get priority here? When are you going to start listening to me?" "Sorry," he mumbled regretfully. "Gotta pick this one up." "Why? Why one more? Will there always be just one more?" She was staring fixedly at the rotating axe on the monitor, trying to square the image with everything else that had happened this morning. Thoughts of her sister's missed wedding were receding rapidly into her memory. They had been replaced by, "Will I ever be allowed to get out of this cab? And will I get out alive?" The man stood under a street lamp on the side of Lakeshore Drive. Encouragingly, dawn was not far away, but the city's lights were still on. Staring at this latest phantom, Ngozi couldn't understand why people who passed him on the highway did not use their cell phones to call the police. If she saw someone like him, she certainly would have. She started to reach into her pocket, then remembered that Festus guy, who was probably some sort of Nigerian vampire, had stolen her cell phone. Of course, the driver stopped to show. Of course, the driver slowed to a stop right in front of the guy on the side of the highway. The door swung open opposite her. After her ears popped, she could hear the big man breathing, even over the increasing roar of early commuters zooming by on the road. Raspy and heavy, his respiration was. He was large, African, and clad in jeans and a t-shirt. She couldn't tell what color the shirt was because its owner was spattered from head to toe in what could only have been blood. Once more, she found herself scrambling to the far side of the seat. Digging into a pocket, she pulled out the only hard object she had in there, a pen. Bending forward, he peered into the cab. His eyes met Ngozi's. He smirked. "Hello there and good morning." His voice was exceptionally deep, somewhere down near the lowest register of which a human being was capable. His accent was Nigerian but very slight. His face glistened as he slid in. Ngozi shut her eyes and squeezed her hands into tight fists. The handle on her door still refused to work. She heard the worn leather beneath the beads creak as the passenger dropped his weight onto the seat. The cab filled with the coppery smell of fresh blood. He said something in Igbo to the driver. "Sure thing," the driver responded in English, maddeningly accommodating as ever. The man's breathing remained loud and grinding, as if he were trying to digest something in his lungs instead of in his stomach. Every so often, he grunted to himself. Trapped, weary, frightened, Ngozi wished the driver would turn his music up loud enough to drown out the sound of the new passenger's merciless respiration. Not long after, but far too much later, the cab finally slowed and stopped. She heard the door open and shut. Her ears popped. Cautiously, she opened her eyes. The sun was just starting to lighten the sky. Had she made her plane, she would have been an hour closer to where she needed to be, instead of stuck and terrified in the confines of a cab not far from her townhouse. No, this wasn't even a cab. The driver didn't have a license displayed anywhere. It was probably illegal. She'd somehow wound up in a Kabu right here in the streets of Greater Chicago. Why didn't you call the police? She didn't have any energy left to shout. She stared at where the passenger had been sitting. The space was stained with blood. Her stomach rolled. For what? The driver asked innocently. She managed to muster a little more volume, a smidgen more outrage. He was covered in blood. Oh, that's just the butcher's preference. He was counting money as he deposited bills in the cab's lockbox. Butcher? Butcher of what? Not my place to ask, the driver replied solemnly. He tips very, very well also. Hates my music, though. Maybe hates all music. He paused. I take you where you need to go now. No more pickup. It's daytime anyway. He touched the screen and the image changed to that of a waving Nigerian flag. She had given up trying to predict whether the driver meant anything he said or if she was interpreting his words correctly. She just rolled with it. When he finally slowed to a stop, she wasn't sure if they were still even in Chicago. In front of them were remnants of what might have been an open flea market half a century ago. My God, a friend of mine told me there were places like this in Chicago, but I've never seen one of them. She calls them dead zones. Ah! Accelerating slowly, the driver turned the cab into a narrow alley that ran parallel to the ghost market. Dead indeed, for sure. Lots of wahala, place like this. Trouble, trouble, trouble. But plenty useful to folks like me, and today folks like you. They drove along flanked by red brick walls. Very red. If Ngozi had not already seen all that she had seen, she would have been sure that this taxi driver, having had his fun, was taking her to a secluded place where he could dismember her at his leisure. Why do we have to take this way to get to this mystery airport of yours? She struggled to keep the shakiness out of her voice. He opened the cab skylight. You see the sky up there? It was the first time she had looked up instead of just out since she had first entered the cab. Oh my, she whispered, forgetting her uncertainties. Even as the dawn sky continued to brighten, she could see millions of twinkling stars, with the plump white full moon perfectly framed in the rectangular opening. She inhaled sharply as she spotted a shooting star, and then another, and another. Shooting stars at twilight, she thought. What a treat. A large bird soared by, passing low and slow. It was gray with a very large beak. She thought she could see it looking at her, following her with its eyes. Impossible, of course. She was exhausted and lapsing into anthropomorphization. What kind of bird was that? She asked herself. Gazing at the expanse of clear, waking sky filled her with more than a little sense of wonder. The weariness dropped away from her like cheap rapa. The voice of the driver interrupted her unanticipated reverie. You might want to hang on for this. It sounded like a warning. Huh? The car started shuddering as the ground beneath the tires came rugged. With no seatbelt to hold her down, she was thrown from side to side, the wind knocked out from her lungs. Biko nu. Just hold on, he shouted over the rumble of the wheels. It won't last long. The bumping became too violent for her to even speak. At any moment, she expected the doors to fall off. They would be followed by the floor, the roof, the engine, and finally her seat. In addition to the deafening noise of vibration, the interior of the cab was filled with a rushing sound, as if the earth was whistling in her ears. Above it all, she could still hear the rhythmic pounding of the cab stereo, though she could no longer make out the words of the irrepressible Fela. Almost as soon as it had commenced, the brutal jouncing stopped. When she had recovered enough to look out the window, she saw that the brick walls had been replaced by trees on both sides of the road. A park. They were driving through one of Chicago's notable parks. At any minute, she expected to see the Museum of Science and Industry or one of the colossally expensive new high rise condos set in carefully landscaped faux natural grounds. Up ahead, the narrow, badly maintained dirt road joined a paved one. Must be coming out of the park, she told herself. As they drew closer, she was able to make out the details of the cross traffic. She sank as far down into her seat as her shaking spine would permit. Good idea. The driver was watching her in the rear view. I was going to suggest that you do exactly that. Stop the car. Don't worry. He did not slow down. I'm known here. The cab's tires screeched as he dug out of the dirt path and pulled onto the main road. A minute later, they were stuck in the most bizarre traffic jam Ngozi had ever seen. Monsters, insane vehicles, monsters riding insane vehicles, and every and all things in between. Creatures sporting every color imaginable, and some that were not. Some instant some insubstantiable as mists, their selves half here and half elsewhere, figments of the imagination, fragments of reality, but not of her mind. She could never have envisioned a fraction of what she was seeing. They were all traveling, on the move, all headlong, heading somewhere. To where exactly was another question to which she did not wish to learn the answer. On the left side of the road, they trekked in one direction, and on the right, the opposite way. As they moved, they made sounds like the wind in the trees, the water in the river, the bees in their hives. Individual yet uniform buzzing and howling and screeching and whispering that ebbed and flowed to a rhythm only they understood. She saw a milky gray-skinned humanoid giant walking on all fours. It had very large breasts and what Ngozi thought was a purple vagina. An equally enormous male ghost dragging an immense penis followed her closely. As Ngozi looked on, speechless and frozen by the sight, he thrust into the giant female thing, and the two continued on their way without pause, walk crawling as they copulated. Turning away, she found herself gazing at a small truck that looked as if it were fashioned entirely from moist eyes. Each eye stared in a single but different direction from the others. As she looked at it, one after another, every one of its intense blue eyes swung around to fixate on her. Oh God, she hissed. Shaking, holding herself, she dropped back down on the seat. It was a position neither her spine nor her curious mind allowed her to maintain for very long. Moments later, she was up again and peeking over the lower edge of the window. Thankfully, the eyeball truck had dropped out of sight. Her cab driver had shifted into a slightly faster interior lane. As he drove on, they were surrounded and hemmed in by thousands, by millions of spirits and ghosts and specters. Some had many legs, some bounced, some drove, some sat inside things that drove. Others crawled or tumbled, flew or dragged themselves along. Shrieking madly, a skeleton woman rode by on a skeleton ostrich. A ghostly man with feet facing the wrong way sprinted swiftly backwards past the cab. A phantom woman walked by on her hands, herding before her a pack of pig-like things that were completely covered with woolly black hair. We all must travel, the driver said, keeping his eyes on the way ahead. His hand scratched the wheel firmly. It's the essence of all things to move and change and keep going forward and backward and around, even the spirits and the dead. He had turned the stereo down low. Clearly, this was not a place where one wanted to aggravate one's fellow travelers. Ngozi tried to concentrate on the muted music as she spoke a silent prayer to whatever gods were hopefully watching over her. She had long since turned her back on Christianity, but she was not an atheist either. In this moment and in this place, atheism was a joke. She closed her eyes. She didn't want to see anymore. Time passed. Long minutes, or maybe it was a short hour. Unable to keep them closed any longer, she finally opened her eyes. They were on a wide road now, and alone. You see, the driver told her confidently, we were just passing through. Traffic can be a problem anywhere. Outside the cab, the terrain looked nothing like Chicago, a city park, or even the far south suburbs. It did not look like any place she had been. The road ahead was old and worn out. The soil on the side of the road was red instead of brown. In place of oak and pine, she saw palm, iroko, mahogany, and oboche trees. Something finally came unhinged in her brain. It was all too much. She'd had more than enough of a morning unreal. Twisting around on the seat, she kicked at the car window as hard as she could. Part of her wanted to stop, but a larger part craved the hopeful tinkle and shattering of glass. Her foot merely left a print on the window. Ah, what are you doing? The driver screamed and the cab took a sudden swerve. Where are you taking me? She screamed. I can't stand this anymore. I'm going crazy. Let me out. Let me out. Where do you think I'm taking you? I'm taking you where you need to be. Are you stupid, big lawyer? Staring wide-eyed at the latest manifestation of impossible surroundings, which happened to be a stretch of palm trees, Ngozi fought to get herself under control. This can't be, she whimpered. It can't be. If it can't be, then how we be here? Lighten up, he instructed her. I said I get you where you have to go, and I will. Ngozi shut her eyes. She opened them. Stop the car. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but kept going. She took a very deep breath. Stop the fucking car, she screamed loud enough to strain the lining of her throat. He pulled over at a crossroads. Tentatively, she tried the door handle. It turned so easily she almost sprained her wrist. She stared at it. It's open. He turned around in his seat. What did you expect? She narrowed her eyes at him. Gripping the handle hard, she pushed. It opened effortlessly. Her ears popped and a rush of warm, humid air caressed her face. Before anything else could happen, she jumped out of the car. She just stood there. The sun beat down hard, the heat and light heavy and hot on her skin. A different kind of sun. The air smelled different too. She sniffed a hint of distant burning wood. A subtle, invisible, but nonetheless very real shift ran through her entire being, like ripples from a stone cast in flat water. She knew where she was. But how? Wordlessly, the driver got out of the cab. She knelt down and touched the ground. She rubbed the red dirt between her fingers. On the road, occasional cars zoomed by, as if this was all normal. Are you coming back in? He was standing behind her now. She grabbed a rock, rose, turned, and threw it at him. A part of her wanted the stone to hit him square between the eyes. All I wanted was a goddamn ride to O'Hare, she screamed. You can't always get what you want. He smiled, that same damnable smile. But if you try sometimes, don't you dare finish that. His smile widening, he sang the last part of the annoying Rolling Stone songs. You get what you need. Bending, she found and threw another stone at him, aiming for the knees. This time she had better luck and he had less. He let out a yelp and grabbed at himself where the rock had hit. The tide of satisfaction that flowed through her was brief. So you do feel pain, she snapped. Well, that's good. At least you're not some fucking demon. Spoken like a true American girl. Woman, I must say. He winced, rubbing the bruise he was going to have. Are you going to get back in the cab so we can finish this trip and you can pay me? No. They were silent, staring hard at each other. She felt as if she had just finished 2 triathlons in a row, without food, across Death Valley, or maybe being chased around the world. Unexpectedly, she found that she had to stifle the sudden urge to laugh. Cautiously, the driver stepped closer. Do you trust me? Let's see now, she thought. I got in your cab under the pretense that you would have me at O'Hare Airport in a half an hour. Instead, I shared the passenger seat with a thieving vampire, a shedding masquerade, some kind of bloody man butcher, and was driven through the traffic of hell or the highway Styx or whatever. And now here I am, alive, alive, and more or less well. Holy shit. I'm in Nigeria? She said wonderingly. He held the door for her as she slowly slid into the back seat, smiling as he did so, of course. She looked at her watch. The hands pointed to the time it had been when she left, give or take a half hour. That can't be right, she mumbled. Somehow she was not surprised to learn that they were only a short distance from her village. Shouts of joy and wide grins of happiness from three of her aunties greeted her when she stepped out. As the driver unloaded her big suitcase, she saw that other guests were disembarking from cabs similar in appearance to the one that had brought her to the site of her sister's wedding. Seeing the shock and jubilation on her sister's face was worth everything Ngozi had gone through to make it home. Almost. Excusing herself, Ngozi paid the driver just for the equivalent of the trip to the airport, he told her. A flat fee. I give you 10% discount for when I carried other passengers. No charge for the time travel. He smiled that enigmatic smile. I don't have a meter anyway. No point in putting one in a cab like mine, is there? The other relatives noticed her, and she found herself swarmed with questions, concerns, and love. When she looked back, the cab was gone. Something on the ground caught her eye. Bending, she picked it up and grinned. It was a tiny, bright red bead. Of the thousands that had decorated the interior of the cab, she doubted the driver would miss it. He seemed to have a good business and would be otherwise occupied. We thought you'd call before you traveled. We were worried about you, her cousin Emika said as she took her suitcase and carry-on and escorted her to the compound's main house. Sorry, she told him. I got up late and forgot to call before leaving. Then, well, I took some weird Nigerian unlicensed cab. It kind of got crazy. Ah, a Niger American style Kabu Kabu. He nodded knowingly. I hear those can be bad business. They stopped in the shade of the house. Emeka, this might sound like a stupid question, but am I too late for the wedding? My watch says, well, I don't know how long I was really in that Kabu Kabu. Emeka looked at her oddly. Too late? No, no, the wedding isn't until tomorrow. You're a day early, Ngozi. She stared at him, then looked down at her watch. So it wasn't broken. That driver, that crazy, smiling, fucking driver, he was busy, all right. He really had lost track of time. And thus endeth the story. Now, for our friends on Clubhouse, I don't know. I had been checking the screen this whole time, and I don't know if it canceled out the room. It looks like it did. So, yeah, it looks like Clubhouse only lets the room go for just over an hour without me interacting with the screen. But how y'all doing over here on YouTube and the Book of Faces, and not Twitch today because Twitch is being something that it rhymes with? How y'all doing? How y'all like the story? I will say, while the author's declarations of the distinctions did rub me the wrong way, reading the story presents absolute distinctions that I can really get into and appreciate. Um, it's interesting because part of the distinction that I read the author making was that Western culture wasn't centered. And while it wasn't centered here, I think that the protagonist, her reception of everything that happened was coming through a decidedly westernized lens. And so I found that to be, it made the story certainly far more interesting. The author also says that she writes African Jujuism, which I think the magical Negro was beginning to poke at. And I think we definitely saw it here in the title story of this collection, Kabu Kabu. Let me hold up the cover one more time. If you, and I really should have gotten some water because That was a lot of reading straight up, and you can hear the raggedness in my voice. If you enjoyed this book, though, you can visit one of our good friends and booksellers, Harriet. Harriet's Bookshop has this available, and you can check it out there. Um, we will come back to this book sometime, probably after the new year, and and we'll come back to it in the new year. I'm looking at some of the comments, and you guys were really, really quiet today. I don't know if you were quiet because the story really caught your attention, or you were quiet because it didn't. Um, Kelly James said that somehow she knew the Kabu Kabu was going to take her to Nigeria once she heard the interior description of the cab. I knew before the cab stopped, right? Like when the cab stopped, I was like, oh, it's going to be a magical cab. And again, as is the case with all the stories, this was a cold read. I had not read this story before. But yeah, it was really, really clear to me that this was going to be a magical cab, and that ultimately the cab was going to take. When he said, I get you where you need to go, I was like, first, he's going to make her see some things that help her see herself. And then he's going to ultimately take her to Nigeria, because there was something about that language. I'll get you where you need to go. This story, for me, was incredibly, I really loved the descriptions, really vivid, really fantastic. Um, it was delightful in its weirdness and its offbeatness. It makes me curious about what these figures. I'm believing, just knowing what little bit I do know of this author, from sort of the pre-research that today's events inspired. I believe that these are all informed by genuine figures that are celebrated and recognized within this culture. And so now I'm curious about that, and the opening up of that curiosity, I think, is infinitely valuable. But and so as fantastic as the story is, it wasn't really surprising. um I had no reason to think she's not going to encounter a bunch of truly fantastic characters. I had no reason to believe that that cab was not going to take her to Nigeria. It just, there was really no place for it to go except where it went. But just because you know where the ride is going to take you doesn't mean that it can't be one hell of a ride. And I think that is where this story is incredibly successful. We knew, I think most of us had to know where it was going, but the way that it got us there and what we saw along the way, people say often, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And I think that that's what this story did incredibly well, was create for us a a a fantastic journey. Um, Come along and ride on a fantastic voyage. Slide, slide, slippity slide. Um, anyway, let me stop. Let's see. Terry Meredith says that she wished she hadn't heard my take on the author's distinction first. It influenced her and she just wasn't able to warm to it or stay focused. I encourage everyone to make their own distinction and make their own understanding about it. I am still, even in this moment, wrestling with that. Um the you know how the author goes about creating distinction around her work is in a lot of ways her business. It's for me, not even in a lot of ways. It isn't always her business. That's her work, and it is quite literally her business. But it is for me, um, another brick in this sort of this wall that I think, that I worry about. The fabrication of this wall, it seems. I was on Clubhouse earlier tonight, and there was a rousing and really, really charged and really electrical discussion about the transatlantic slave trade and the role of Africans, colonial Africans, in selling other Africans to the Dutch slavers. And there was some call for accountability. And there was there was some real pain being expressed there. And one of the brothers said, we can't call all of this facts. Well, this is a build right now. We're trying to put together the stories as we know them, colonial Africans, Black Americans, putting together the histories that we know so that we can find out the root of the truth and either come together or come apart. And that was the part that broke my heart, that coming apart was one of the perceived options. Like, do we try to draw closer, or do the painful truths about our history pull us even further apart? You know, the reality, um, I mean, there is historical evidence that, yeah, there are wealthy Nigerian families now whose wealth was built on the transatlantic slave trade. Just like Barclays is what Barclays is because it profited from the slave trade, so too is the case for many wealthy Nigerian families. How do we as Black Americans reconcile with that? You know? So I'm saying all that to say there are some really painful political and social conversations around the differences and the distinctions made between Black Americans and um, Black Americans whose origins are not, they're not descendants of enslaved people. Um, and I guess my naive hope was that in places like Afrofuturism, where as a genre we dared to imagine a brighter Black world, where we dared to imagine a more unified Black world, where we dared to imagine a world where Blackness is what makes us special because it's what makes us part of a whole. That even in that world, that's a fantasy, that not a fantasy in the delightful sense, but a fantasy in the naive sense, the sense that we still have these walls, that we still have a need to have these distinctions. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to create a distinction to celebrate where you're from. It's just that I felt a hurt. I felt a hurt there. I perceived in the language a putting down of folks of the diaspora that were not, straight up out of their homeland. And that part made it difficult. Now, I've still got a lot of investigating and studying and thinking on this to do. This all just happened a few hours before the reading of these stories and presenting this to you. But that knowledge, that foreknowledge, just Terry, as you said, that you wish you hadn't heard it because it impacted how you perceived the story. I wish I hadn't either because it impacted how I perceived the story. And I thought these were phenomenal works of art, but I felt a little bit like they weren't mine to enjoy. I felt like they weren't meant for me. It almost felt like you can look at it, but this ain't this ain't for you. And I think I wanted to feel connected to it more than I felt allowed to. And so that distinction created a little bit of hurt for me. And it is what it is. It really is. Because again, the artist created the art in her own context, and we consume the art with that understanding, such as it is. So let's go back. I want to pick up a couple of these other comments. I saw Jack was in here. I want to see what he had to say. And I saw something from Erica Yolita. Let's see. Erica's comment was, that story was quite fantastic. It isn't so much Afrofuturism, but it felt like an Afro sci-fi, like an African wrote the original script for Back to the Future. Okay. The Back to the Future part got me, but sure, let's go with that. Um, yeah, the author does make really, really clear that the distinction that she makes um, for African futurism is that it is sci-fi. And to be clear, to your point, Afrofuturism as a genre does have roots in a few other genres. Afrofuturism kind of pulls a little bit from a few other things, speculative fiction, and it pulls a little bit from the world of fantasy. And so there's just so if we're passing a purity test on sci-fi, arguably, this author says that her work is in the science fiction genre. I don't know. For me, a lot of this, because of the elements of magic, um, I didn't really see a lot of science here. I didn't see science fiction. I saw I would I wonder if this story in particular is one that she would say is in African Jujuism. That would make more sense to me because I was missing the sci-fi part. Loved it, really truly loved it. Didn't occur for me as sci-fi. Um, Joker loves how different it was and says it was predictable, but not necessarily how you were going to get there. Agreed. L. Jack's first comment, I love this story, especially the delineation of the American Black and others. Um, and then what did Tauntaun say here? If all of the other passengers are magical, then it begs the question, who are you? Uh, Well, damn. Okay. That's one to think about. Yeah. Because you're right. Everybody that he picked up was someone from a magical place, and he picked her up too. Huh. Well, go ahead, Tauntaun. All right. Let's see. Um, Let's see here. Terry says again, I definitely understand your take. I just wish it had been left for the end. The minute I am able to perceive anti blackness, I turn to ice. I get that. And please don't take my take on it as gospel. You might read her words and get an entirely different point of view. I actually I called Dr. Linda Chavers a bit earlier because this is her field, and it's nice to have PhDs that you can call up and say, I feel a way about a thing, and I want to make sure that I'm giving it all the weight that it deserves. And she gave me a little bit of perspective on it too. And, her take was kind of the same. It was like, look, Nigeria in particular and Black Americans, we've got a history of some acrimony there. Not the Tyler Perry movie, but we have a history of that. And so, if you're perceiving it, I'm not going to say to you that it's not real, but I will say to you it's not as simple. Like you can't really dismiss that point of view of saying when we talk about representation, saying, you know what, I'm not that. I'm not these other writings of the diaspora. I'm repping hard for my set. I just feel like you can rep hard for your set in a way that does not shit on other people's sets. Um, for those of you who are here, please do follow and subscribe and share to our pages. This is where you can find us on all the socials. Angel Monique, thank you so much for pointing that out. I invited somebody here from the clubhouse earlier. So, Nikki Lopez, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming out. You have a good evening too. Folks, Storytime with Julian always ends at 11:15. We are well past our bedtime. We are 20 minutes outside of that. I definitely need to get myself a cool beverage to kind of settle my throat. We are not going to do the after story tonight. In fact, the after story will reconvene after the new year. We're going to make a couple of changes in format, and I really want more participation out of that. So we're going to be finding the best way to build up the after story so that those who are a member of that page can really participate more fully. This has been Storytime with Julian. I am Julian. Tonight we read two stories from this wonderful collection, Kabu Kabu. I encourage you to check it out. If you look to buy it, please give Amazon a rest. They have made all the monies that they need. Check out our friends over at Harriet's. And and I am going to enjoy a cool, non viscous beverage. Thanks so much for coming by and spending time with me. We will see you again on Thursday. Yeah, even though it's a big old special day, we're going to do it. And with that, folks, we're going to go ahead and roll these credits and check out. Thanks again. Bye bye.